The film begins with Tom, an antiquarian bookstore owner in New York City. On this special day, a young doctoral student met. Student Sandra entered her bookstore to find her perfect birthday gift for her professor. Her passion for her books caught the eye of her charming owner, Tom, who was a book lover and couldn't help but converse with her. Tom asks Sandra out on a date when deciding how much to buy her, but to her dismay she declines with a soft smile, revealing that she is happy to be single. Tom respected Sandra's decision and tried to swipe her card for her payment, but was repeatedly denied, leaving her lady empty-handed for her. He kindly and politely handed her the book and told her to come back and pay for it as soon as possible. Later that night, as Tom is closing down, Sandra approaches him, and Sandra pays for the book and arranges a date. The two have a good time at a Japanese restaurant. It turns out that Tom had pursued his writing career, but the death of his mother and his struggle with depression forced him to abandon his passion and seek solace within the walls of a bookstore. I was. Her story of Sandra is a very heartbreaking tale of how she and her younger brother had to roll from foster home to foster home after the death of her parents. Ever since Sandra read a Jane Eyre novel from one of her adoptive parents' novel collections, she has fallen in love with the book. The remarkably similar personalities of the two book readers set off a love story that lasts until a few days change everything. Tom's visit to Sandra's house is interrupted one night by her persistent knocking on the door and takes an unexpected turn. According to Sandra, it's her brother Jason who desperately needs cash to pay off drug debt. She also reveals to Tom how Jason was unlucky with his foster family. Some of the houses he was housed in were nightmares, which made him what he is now. Despite seeing his brother's violent behavior, Tom continues to date Sandra and even comforts her when needed. It's been a few weeks since their first date, but their relationship is as exciting as ever. One night, Tom tells Sandra that things aren't going well with her father and that he thinks her son is a disappointment to him. Also, his father has a new wife, which makes Tom very uncomfortable in his house. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, but one day Tom visits Sandra and finds her hopelessly alone in her room. Her brother turned out to be in serious trouble after being brutally beaten by a group of thugs who were in debt. He threatened to come back and kill him if he didn't pay within 4 days. Tom believes that the gang's oncoming raid cannot be stopped unless the gang pays him. Since the amount in question is his $350,000, Sandra doesn't think paying off the debt is a viable option. Tom then talks about his father's hedge fund and that the money is in a bank account. He offers to help, but Sandra refuses to accept such a large amount of money from a stranger. But in Tom's eyes, the best thing that ever happened to him was his one true love, Sandra, and he would do anything to protect her. Left with no other choice, Sandra decides to accept her favor so that she will return the favor someday, no matter how long it takes. After Sandra makes an appointment to meet Tom that evening, she leaves to deliver the money. That night, Tom waits for Sandra at the restaurant where she had her first date, but unfortunately Sandra doesn't show up. Tom despairs as she disappears from the apartment and never returns. The scene then switches to Sandra, where we finally get to see her for who she really is. The film recounts how Sandra visited a parole officer at a bar a few weeks before meeting Tom. The seemingly kind and innocent Sandra turns out to be none other than a probation officer with a long criminal record. A parole officer begins questioning Sandra about her job, but she replies that Sandra worked at Starbucks. But it didn't take long for her lie to be exposed when a smart police officer found out she hadn't been to work for a month. Her release is in violation of her probation agreement and she admits to smoking marijuana the night before, leaving her police officers with no choice but to arrest her. Just then, a wealthy man named Max approaches and bribes a policeman into letting Sandra go free. Max offers $400 plus a Rolex, but the policewoman flatly refuses to accept the bribe. As Max walks away, the cops finally realize that she made a big mistake in refusing the large sum of money. The women invite the men to chat, and eventually Max agrees to give the parole officer his Rolex, leaving Sandra completely confused. After the police officers gleefully walk away with the wristwatch, Max reveals it was just a copy used to perform the trick. He offers Sandra her $1,000 share, and the clever man finally succeeds in persuading Sandra to listen to his plans. He takes her to his apartment and offers her a place to sleep only if she agrees to work for him. The next day, Sandra wakes up to find Max having breakfast in the kitchen. The man strikes up a conversation about the movie, giving Sandra the impression that he loves Titanic, but doesn't really watch the movie at all. This is a trick they trick others into out of their money. A con artist, Sandra seduces rich men by showing them the personality they want in their partners. It's Max's responsibility to gather all the necessary information about the target so that Sandra can easily carry out the theft. However, unlike Max, he finds Sandra spending her nights smoking cannabis without focusing on her plans. Enraged, he kicks her out of her apartment and even out of her elaborate plans. When Sandra begs her forgiveness, Max eventually agrees to let her in, but on the condition that she remains clean throughout her mission. The next day, Sandra has a lot of work to do as she has to learn and memorize Tom's favorite books, quotes and even authors. Not only does she need to understand Tom's interests, but she also needs to create a whole new personality for herself. Everything she told Tom, from her educational background to her family background, was a complete fabrication. Practicing each move required days of cramming and using brain-boosting techniques to capture every detail, but all in the name of winning Tom's heart. After several days of hard work, Max takes Sandra out to dinner and asks her to seduce the man at her counter. Sandra is a pro, so it only takes her a few minutes to break into a man's room using her seduction techniques. But just as the two begin to get intimate, Max bursts into her room, playing the role of Sandra's ex-boyfriend and accusing her of infidelity. Sandra said she needed to calm him down and told him to wait in the lobby for a few minutes. As the man rushes to leave, Max transforms into his true form and begins searching for cash and other valuables. Realizing that Sandra has mastered the trick, Max begins the game he's been planning for weeks. The film then switches to Max, returning to the day before his partnership with Sandra. He visits her mother in a luxury apartment, where Max's mother Madeline meets a man named Richard, a famous millionaire who loves her wife with all her heart and who can't stand to be hurt by anyone. "No, you're married." But Max doesn't miss an opportunity and annoys his mother by calling the man an old man. Drunk and belligerent, Max convinces Madeline to let him stay in Richard's apartment for a while. When Madeline and Richard return home the next day, they discover that Max has been arrested on suspicion of soliciting drugs from an undercover agent. Not wanting things to get any worse, Richard takes out the $1,000 and tries to give it to an undercover agent. However, Max's mother realizes that Max tried to scam Richard out of money by calling a fake police officer, and Max and his friends finally admit what they have been doing. Madeline then slaps Max in the face, who always looks disgusted in front of Richard, and kicks him out of the apartment. However, the mother came to apologize the other day and revealed a fact that exceeded our expectations. It turns out that Madeline is none other than Max's girlfriend, and she is working with Max to try and trick billionaire Richard. She tells Max that Richard wants to meet at the office to discuss her issues. The next day, Max arrives at the office to see Richard, who has just finished a medical checkup. But to their surprise they are reunited with Tom, who turns out to be Richard's son. At this point he has yet to meet Sandra. Richard then reveals his argument with Tom. He turns out to be angry with Tom for showing no interest in his business empire after his mother's death. The only son of a tycoon wanted a bookstore to make a living doing what he loved, not for luxury goods. After explaining his problem, Richard gets down to business. Due to Max's disrespectful attitude towards his mother, Richard demands a large sum of money in exchange for Max's disappearance from Madeline's life. Max agrees to leave his so-called mother by paying $60,000 a month and a year's salary in advance and never to return. Packed with cash, Max enters the bar, where his accomplice Madeline and a fake cop wait eagerly to celebrate the success of the scam. Her next plan is to get out of town as soon as possible, but to do that, Madeline has to go back to her apartment to pick up something. However, as the sun rises, Max calls Madeline, only to be told she doesn't want to elope. Winning Richard's heart gave her access to his infinite riches, much greater than what Max had from Richard. Not only did Madeline cheat on her partner, she also called the police. Betrayed and cornered, Max slams the phone. His heart races with fear as he struggles to escape. The next scene focuses on Madeline. A few weeks later Richard died after a long illness. We know she's only pretending to be in tears before she leaves her room to see someone else. Richard's lawyer then tells Madeline and Tom that Richard left his property, assets, stocks, shares, and the remaining $9.2 billion to Madeline alone. Richard's concerns about Tom after the Sandra incident only give Tom the confidence to keep the bookstore. He was only appointed chairman of the Richard Foundation, and Madeline was on the board. Madeline keeps apologizing for giving Tom the impression that he doesn't want the money, but deep down he's very excited to be the sole owner of the entire company. Tom trusts his stepmother, and he doesn't seem to doubt it for a second. Madeline uses her newfound wealth to begin a luxurious life of her own, shopping in luxury stores. Until one day Tom showed up with Sandra's suitcase. He asked a friend of his father, Braddock, to help him find the woman who committed the theft. Braddock believes that with all the information he has, Sandra cannot commit this type of fraud alone. That means there are multiple people behind this elaborate scheme. The next day, Madeline tries to dissuade Tom from pursuing Sandra's case. Madeline tells Tom that she doesn't care that the money has been stolen, she just wants to see Sandra, and manages to manipulate him into forgetting about her villainy. Tom stops his men from looking for Sandra, but they follow her last lead and it turns out they have somehow found Sandra. Seeing her exhausted in her apartment, Tom tells his men that it's true that Sandra wasn't working alone. It turns out that her accomplice to Sandra, who we knew as Max, betrayed her and left her nothing of hers. According to Sandra, the man told her all about Tom and had some connection to Tom's family. Sandra regrets her own choices, so Tom is forced to allow her to stay here until she recovers. When Madeline hears this, she refuses, saying she can't trust junkies like her, but Tom insists. Madeline visits her room to settle things with Sandra, but it turns out that Sandra knows everything about Madeline from Max. She thinks Sandra wants her things right and is ready to confess Madeline's crimes. When Madeline demands her deal, Sandra agrees to keep her in hiding on the condition that she bring in the person who betrayed her. Madeline doesn't know where Max is, but he has no choice but to keep calling. After spending several stressful days waiting for Max to respond to her voice messages, Madeline finally manages to get in touch with Max, who later agrees to help her again. Madeline pretends to take Sandra out for a walk and takes her out of the apartment to set up a meeting with Max. Sandra is furious when she sees the man cheating on her, but before she can get him to apologize, two cars show up unexpectedly. It turns out to be Tom and his men, and Tom finally finds out who his stepmother really is. Tom and Braddock arrive and confirm Tom's suspicions that the three are working together. Instead of regretting her own sins, Madeline says there is nothing she can do because all of her Richard's fortune is now hers. During this heated argument, Tom suddenly snatches Braddock's gun and nearly shoots Madeline, who has ruined his life. Sandra prevents this, but Madeline has her gun thrown at her, so she grabs it and threatens everyone. Frustrated, Tom grabs the pistol from Madeline's hand and forces her to pull the trigger, resulting in his death. Tom's men believe Madeline is the killer and he wants to call the police. Madeline panics because she doesn't want to spend the rest of her life in her prison. Desperate to avoid imprisonment, she immediately called a lawyer and had her estate transferred to the Richard Foundation as a way out of this ordeal. Braddock accompanies the three, while Sandra boards the plane with Madeline and Max. Madeline reminds Max that Tom is dead and that she will retain control of her money because she is the trustee of the Richard Foundation. When she hears that she's still talking about money after Tom's death, Sandra excuses herself and goes to the bathroom. Suspicions grow as Madeline and Max realize that the stain on Madeline's sleeve is fake, implying that Tom is still alive. Madeline suspects Max of being the mastermind, but Max denies it when he realizes Sandra has been in the bathroom for a while. When I looked into her bathroom, Sandra was already gone. To the final episode where the identity of the plan is finally revealed. It turns out that Sandra has actually fallen in love with Tom and she decides to confess everything she had planned with Madeline and Max after Richard's death. With Sandra's help, Tom managed to form his own team with Braddock and others, who directed the whole play very well. A meeting between Sandra and Max is planned, where through a trick Sandra manages to trick both masters. Tom is still alive, so he retains control of the foundation and funds. The movie ends with the scammers getting paid for their scam project, helping Tom get his infinite fortune back, and leaving his cozy bookstore away from all the negativity in his life. In a surprising twist of deception and romance, the film concludes with Sandra's true feelings for Tom being revealed. Through an elaborate plan, Tom not only regains his fortune but also finds love and a fresh start away from the world of scams and deceit. Love triumphs over deception, and a new chapter begins for Tom and Sandra as they embark on a journey filled with trust, honesty, and genuine affection for each other.